experiential learning and higher education with examples of DePaul. Then we're going to talk about the student experiences and lessons learned and open it up for a dialogue on everyone's experiences, projects, and courses that they're involved with. So first things first, really quickly, through reading about experiential learning, so through the literature as well as my own experience and experiences of others, we have learned that experiential learning provides students an opportunity to engage in hands-on experience. It integrates academic and civic learning, develops critical thinking, interpersonal skills, as well as social responsibility, helps us understand better complex social issues, develops mutually reciprocal benefits in terms of relationships between students and community partners, as well as allows for creation of relationships and networking. So here are some samples of internships. I'm not going to go through all of them, but you can kind of see that there is an array of different options. And this is just a quick snapshot of what students have done at DePaul. There are many, many more non-for-profit organizations as well as research projects that students have been involved with over the course of years. And then some of the different populations, again, you can kind of see the array of different populations that students have worked with. So we're really not limiting our students. They can work in any kind of setting as long as it is providing community psychology, guided by community psychology values, and provides the type of services that we support, uses methodology that we encourage, etc. So some of the examples really quickly, one course that is offered every quarter, and this is something that what we call direct services, and it's part of the community-based service learning, which also works as a junior year experiential learning for students, which is a requirement for every student at DePaul. It's a psychology and social justice course. And the purpose of this course is to gain exposure to the foundational principles of social justice and insight into the connection between these principles and psychological research impacting social justice issues. What students do is they engage in 25 hours at least, some do more, and they are providing direct services to non-for-profits in the area. At the end, students put together as a group a project, which includes creating an asset map of the organization's community and design an intervention based on the community's needs, and also provide students with kind of opportunities to get involved with the same issue. Another one is Introduction to Community Psychology. This course is offered twice every quarter at DePaul. It provides an introduction to the field. And of course, you know, we're trying to get students early on engaged with the community. So what students do is they go into the community, but not literally, but rather have the community partners come in and they learn about the community by creating a project together with the partners. So they're guided by the partners in creating a literature review summary, as well as kind of plan of action and suggestion for, again, ways to get involved for their classmates. And then finally, we have a fieldwork community research in action, which is a 2-quarter internship course for those who are in community concentration. This is, again, 2-quarter course. Students are engaged in 6 to 8 hours per week of internship, and it is designed to actively illustrate the relevance of academic work in an applied setting. And students are working with organizations based on kind of the needs assessment, together collaboratively creating a final project that is then presented to the organization. So here's an example of the poster from a couple of years ago with the MPA, and I'm happy to share this so you can kind of look a little bit closer. So my students put together a poster talking about community psychology values and principles and how they have seen those values and principles in their work at their fieldwork sites. So designing service learning and fieldwork courses, there are some things that you should keep in mind. For example, what might be your idea for a project or a course? What would you like your students to learn? Any deliverables or products that can be created, and again, within a quarter, so you kind of have to keep in mind time. How can these products be useful to a community partner? It's really important for us that this is a collaborative process, not just students doing something they are interested in, but it really matches what the community wants. Who might be the possible partners? You rely on your networks and existing connections, so the STEAM Center is a big, helper with that for us. Meeting with partners before class begins and staying in contact with them throughout the quarter, creating a way to connect for students and partners. I personally have found Google Docs to work very well, but there are all kinds of different ways that you can connect with partners, and then celebrating in the end. So I have to thank the STEAM Center again, because for the intro classes, they have actually provided pizza and drinks for students during the class, and we invite the partners in, and there's this big celebration when students present their presentations in class. And then for the field work, we help students create contracts, which is kind of another skill that they can gain from this. So this is kind of in a nutshell what we are seeing in our own community. And we are happy to start talking about students' experiences, as well as getting participants to share their experiences. But any questions before we go on? You can type it in the chat.
Did you run into any difficulties when you were teaching the fieldwork class? And if so, like, how did the students navigate them, or how did you encourage them to seek solutions?
Sure. What a loaded question. I've been teaching for so many years. I'll be lying if I said everything was a smooth sailing. So of course, and again, I have to thank my mentors and the STEAM Center for constantly providing different types of training and support. And so to give you one example, it's a 2-quarter course, and the student had an incident happen at their site, and we encourage students to stay for 2 quarters at the field work site. As you know, the longer you're there, the more responsibilities you get, the more trust you build, more connections you make. And the student was sharing about this incident with their mother, and the mother said, "You can't go back. I'm not going to let you. That's not safe." Even though it was not exactly a situation where student felt unsafe, but just their parent. And so the student literally comes to me and says, "I'm just going to tell her I'm not there anymore, but I'm going to continue going." And I'm like, whoa, hold on a second. You can't do that. So we have successfully finished as quickly as possible, finished the relationship, because you can't just pull out of the community. And then the student was moved. So that was not the most successful example, but that's a rarity compared to more successful examples. And so navigating, again, some of the minor ones that were students come to me and say, well, I asked my supervisor, what can I do? Thinking about the final project. And they literally give them a list. And one of the first things was, you can sharpen pencils. And we went, that is not exactly the type of skills that you want to get out of this experience. You could be doing other things. So that is a huge, I think, part of this class is gaining that skill of negotiating your responsibilities. And so I work with students. I'm kind of in the background. I try to guide them, but not lead them. It's on them. This is their thing. But I'm always there, supporting them. And so we kind of talked about that with that particular student, about how do you renegotiate other responsibilities, and we were successful. And so from that day on, I actually bring up this example early on to let the students know, to keep in mind that, again, this is part of the learning, this is part of the experience. So little things come up here and there, little hiccups. Sometimes, you can't control everything. Like if the funding runs out during the field work and the supervisor says, sorry, the project is closed, you can't come back, there's nothing you can do. And so we always kind of try to, one of the biggest goals is trying to remain flexible. So I tell them this is life. So yeah, there's not like one answer. This is community psychology. As my students say, my favorite answer to all questions is, it depends. So yeah, I hope that answered a little bit.
Olya, there's a question on the chat.
Yeah.
How will field-based internships work during the pandemic?
Great question. So I was teaching 2 fieldwork courses this year. One was an undergraduate fieldwork, and that actually just finished when we were going into the kind of the lockdowns. And so we, in a sense, locked out, that my students did not have to renegotiate a lot. The only thing that I did is I said, why don't you push any deadlines that anything that needs to be done, as well as evaluations from the site, students were able to turn them in later because we understood that the non-for-profits and research projects were also scrambling, trying to figure out what is happening. My other course, unfortunately, was still going into the quarter. That was a graduate fieldwork course, and students were very successful in creating, or rather recreating what they were doing and finishing up what they started remotely. The plus of that was, and Tad can speak a little bit to that maybe, is that most students already had majority of their work done, and it was set during the winter quarter. And so going into the spring quarter, they didn't have to start from scratch. They just needed to finish, and most were very successful. My only concern right now is, what do I do with fieldwork in the fall? And that's something that I'm trying to figure out right now with my students. My suggestion is to negotiate remote internships. And if something happens and changes, hopefully in a positive way, you can always change that to in-person internship, but it would be harder if you set everything up for in-person internship and then you have to kind of scramble and change that into an online format or remote format. And Tad, do you wanna maybe say a few words about kind of how that worked out for you, your experience transitioning into the remote internship?
Sure. Can everybody hear me?
Yes. Yep.
Okay, because I had to change headphones. Yeah, the first, because DePaul requires community psychologists, up-and-comers, to do 2 years of field work. And I'll speak on this one because it's more current, and this one was a bit more challenging due to the fact that COVID and the civil unrest happened, which in and of itself is a tremendous stress. And not thinking about like also how that impacts our research. So I mentioned earlier in the poster session, like I wanted to collect more data for the student evaluation, because that was my fieldwork project, was to evaluate the textbook, the free community psychology textbook. And professors were very kind and responded when I sent out the surveys that they just don't feel right giving their students more on top of what they're already doing. It's already difficult for them to manage. So I had to be completely compassionate about that. And I also understood, like, if they kept throwing evaluations at me for, students and professors, I would, feel overwhelmed as well. So, instead of doing that, we ended up, good communication was a thing that I had with Olya and Dr. Jason and Jack and Katie, and we all figured out like different things that I could do as opposed to the things we had started. So flexibility became very important this time, into not just giving up hope and like, okay, we got to scrap the whole thing, but like, okay, since those things that we thought we were going to do are no longer viable, what are some viable things that we can do? And as community psychologists, I feel we have those skills to kind of adapt to change rather quickly and figure out what the new thing is that we should be focused on. And that was my experience with this class. And at the end of the year, I was able to give a presentation, and we ended up that I had to do lecture notes for the books because those were missing. And then I added quiz questions. Instead of just the evaluation, I started doing other things so I could also stay useful and contribute to my fieldwork project. I think that's all I have to say about that until.
Thank you, Ted. And you exemplify one of those students. The whole class was amazing in, again, being able to be creative and still contribute to their site. So nobody just dropped stuff. I mean, we had to, again, renegotiate some things, but all of the projects were simply amazing. But you bring up another great point. So the question was specifically about pandemic. We also had an extra factor added when, what about, I can't even, the time wise, what was like a couple of weeks ago when with all the unrest and kind of the boiling point of our country. So that was another hit for the students. Of course, a lot of anxiety, fear, helplessness, among many other feelings. And so one of the things that we decided to do for that class is that students have more time to work on their projects into the summer. So instead of kind of having to rush and, really quickly finish something, we decided that for better quality, but mostly for the sanity and self-care of our students, to let them, give them some space and time to finish the projects. It looks like we have a question from Judith.
Yes, hi, Olya and
Hi.
everyone. Judy Kent from National Louis. Hi, I'm really interested in what you're discussing here because I am developing an Introduction to Community Psychology course for undergraduates at NLU. I'm a little jealous because it looks like you've got 3 courses that build up to this really important field work, and I am trying to embed as the final project the field work, which is connecting to a community organization. One of the big questions I have is for your students, they're getting prepared to do this over a course of a few terms, right? One of the things that I'm interested in is how specifically do you prepare them to be professional and represent DePaul well when they're out in the community?
Excellent question. So for the introduction to community psychology, these are all undergraduates, and they're kind of actually thrown into it. And I have to, again, I keep thinking the Stain Center, but they're great. They come in and they talk about, in addition to what we are learning in class about things like strength-based approach, not coming in as with a savior complex, identifying the assets over the needs, all of those things that we talk about in class, they come in and talk about that as well. And it's also tied to the Vincentian values. So students are somewhat prepared, but this is more of not the field work, but the service learning class. So most of it happens in class. For the field work course, students are in their senior year, and during the junior year spring quarter, there's a whole course that's dedicated to, in part, continue learning about the field of community psychology. So instead of reading the textbook like we do in the intro course, we are reading articles, and we have guest speakers, either physically or virtually, come into class and talk about their work so that you can kind of see, okay, well, this is not just in theory what community psychology is. You see, these are community psychologists, and this is the type of work they do, which I think is very powerful. But the other half of the course is specifically what you were talking about, is preparing the students. The assignments built in include initial internship search. So students are performing a search with pluses and minuses, pros and cons of each, and then continue into building, building on, if you already have one, curriculum vitae. For most, I should say, students, that's the first time they're working on the curriculum vitae. And then the next assignment is you already kind of know which area, which organization you want to partner with. So it's a literature review on the topics or the issues that your organization is working on. And finally, at the end, each student is creating an organizational profile of the site that they think that is the potential site I will work at. Now, has everyone gotten into those sites and worked with them in the fall? I would love to say yes, but the answer is no, unfortunately. So sometimes we kind of still have to work on getting students placed in the fall, but throughout the summer, I am available to work with students and prepare them for that transition into the fall, getting into the sites. So we're kind of so again, the 356 or Principles of Community Psychology Research and Action kind of has that component built in where we talk about internships, we work on the curriculum vitae, we work on organizational profile and things like that. I also can bring in individuals from the Career Center. It's very important to me. And so they talk about some of the things as well. And we utilize their services. One of which is called Handshake, where you input your interests and it gives out or sends you updates rather of organizations in the area that are looking for interns or employees. And I know Jack has gone through our concentration, so maybe he can talk a little bit about that course and and kind of how that prepared him for the internship.
Yeah, I'd be happy to talk about that. I think really what it helped me prepare for is I think that there's a lot of aspects of sort of service learning or working with outside organizations that, at least for me, I didn't even think of before starting it, you know. And one thing that I learned a lot in the class was sort of these various situations that can occur. And sort of like Ted was talking about earlier, sort of that need for adaptability or flexibility. When I did my actual service learning, I sort of kept that in mind, and I had an idea of what I'd be doing. I ended up volunteering at the Chicago Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression. And it turns out they had a myriad of different strategies, you know, focusing on sort of the Chicago criminal justice system and a lot of injustices that occurred. And I had notions of what I'd be doing. And then I ended up on this project where we were reading letters from people who were claiming wrongful incarceration and in need of assistance. And I ended up, you know, editing them to some degree and doing some research and contacting aldermen. And it was really different from what I was expecting. I was expecting a lot more activism based, and it was really much more focused on sort of other sort of localized initiatives and just a lot of different things that I was not quite expecting, and a really enriching experience. So I don't know if that answers your question, Dr. Glantsman.
Well, can you speak a little bit to the class, just having gone through that, like working on the initial search and the CV? Was that?
Yeah. Sorry. So I had never done a CV really before I started the class. I had been doing some research, but I had never put it together, and I had never done a resume. So the CV training that we got and sort of going over the CV was really helpful. And we had various templates that we could use, and I sort of just found one that fit. And what really helped me was learning how to write about research experiences in a way that's effective. Because at least in my case, I tend to write a lot, and then sort of the essence of what I was doing gets lost. And when we were going over CVs and how to put them together, I was able to sort of focus on the gist of each experience and really getting everything and conveying everything in a succinct way where whoever's reading it can get an idea of, you know, what I did, what I learned, and sort of the skills that I can bring into whatever setting I'm moving into.
Does that answer the question a little bit? And I'm, of course, happy to share any materials that I have with anyone. And I see there is a question, does the actual field work with the organization last an entire semester? Good question. So we are on quarter systems, which is, in this sense, probably is problematic because it's shorter. So for graduate students, an internship lasts a whole year from the fall until June. And in the first quarter, students are focusing more on building connections, working on their contract, and then they actually begin working winter and finish up in the spring quarter. For the undergraduate fieldwork, it's a 2-quarter course. So students begin in the fall, so in September, and finish in March, mid-March typically. And for the undergraduate Introduction to Community Psychology, which is more of a service learning course, it's unfortunately only a quarter long. So that's why it's something to keep in mind when you're thinking about what are the deliverables, which products can you create and you know, share with the organization, because that is really not that much time. Any other questions? Or any experiences that you want to share about either when you were in school, undergraduate or graduate school? Oh, I see a question. How does one do service learning during the coronavirus pandemic? I have been having the students do service learning. So going back, we touched on it a little bit earlier. The idea is that we are not just going to cancel the class because we can't physically be in a setting. And so it comes down to negotiating and trying to move to the remote option. And we have different options for students. Even in classes where my students do face-to-face and they go into the sites over the years, there have been students who have done things and projects that were more doable, so to speak, remotely. So I have had students who engaged in creating and updating websites, creating and putting out monthly newsletters. There were students who were doing media campaigns. So some of those things can be done remotely. And this is kind of what we're planning on for now, at least for the fall of this year. So I would say don't give up, use your students, pick their brains, use your students to give you feedback about what they want to do, talk about some possible options so that they can go to the sites and say, well, here are the skills that I have. This is what I can offer, and see if there is a project that they can be chosen collaboratively. Ted or Jack, did you have any comments on that in terms of moving to remote service learning or fieldwork?
Well, I think that Zoom and other platforms are getting more and more use, and I think people are really learning how to really optimize use of these platforms, like when you were sharing the PowerPoint earlier. And just because we can't maybe meet with organizations in person doesn't mean that a lot of good work can't get done. I know that with my fieldwork experience, I think a lot of it could have been translated online pretty easily. I think that the face-to-face interaction and missing that definitely isn't ideal. But I do think that there can still be a service learning component online, and sort of like with all higher education, it's just adapting to this new situation and sort of the online landscape. But I think that with Zoom meetings and with emails and whatever your actual content is, I think that's definitely doable to do service learning, but I imagine it's harder to find sort of the sites and maybe who needs help because there's less sort of normal interaction as we're used to it. But I think that we're going to adapt as we move forward, especially as everyone sort of is planning on being more remote, at least for the fall and the winter, and maybe who knows how long after that.
You make an excellent point, and I didn't even think about it. I don't know why, but whenever a service learning for the introduction to community psychology is created, I cannot physically travel to all the sites, especially because we don't end up working with all of the sites that might be interested originally. And so the way we narrow down which organizations are interested in working with us is the State Center organizes a Zoom call. So way before the pandemic began, we've been using Zoom. I don't know why I didn't think about it. And throughout the quarter, as I mentioned on the slides, we utilize forms that we can share. And so I specifically use Google Docs for my students and the organization to keep in contact throughout the quarter. So that is mostly virtual as well. The only thing that I think will be missing is that party when the partners come in. I think it just makes a big difference when somebody is physically present, is watching, and then comments and says something like, my goodness, this is fantastic. We've always wanted to do this, but we don't have the people power, or we were not aware of this research. We're going to use it to maybe help us write a grant. Oh, this is it. It means so much to the students. So that component is going to be missing. But I also have to say that even before the pandemic, some partners, think about all the work that not-for-profits are doing, how busy they are. I have had partners who could not make it into class, and they have Zoomed in to watch the presentation. So it's been done before. While I prefer, as Jack is saying, like face-to-face, especially that celebration, it is definitely doable via Zoom, especially if you plan ahead. I think you can't leave it to the last minute.
This one's kind of related to not the field work, but the principles that I learned during the field work and with COVID-19 happening. My first field work project at DePaul was with a women's recovery house on the west side of Chicago. And they were looking to make some minor repairs to the house, or maybe add a garden, because they had a lot of space next to the house. And this was prior to COVID-19, so I was able to visit the house a couple times. And we didn't get the money for repairs, but I did get them materials to start the garden. And with that in mind, after this fieldwork class that I'm doing this time with the textbook, kind of at the same time, I saw a need for recovery houses and examining COVID-19. So we ended up writing a grant to see if we could get some funding to do some research about health disparities and those experiencing COVID at alarmingly higher rates than other disproportionate populations, which happen to be people of color and, you know, people of lower socioeconomic status. So I took the same principles of fieldwork class and introduced them into this grant that we could kind of incorporate in the future. So I didn't see it, like, hindsight is 2020, obviously, but I couldn't see these things earlier on when I was starting. I didn't know how these pieces would fit into the puzzle to complete the picture. But now, moving forward, I'm seeing, oh, the experiences I learned doing it the first time when I was really frustrated helped me this time to kind of organize my thoughts and move in a more linear way and be more effective as a researcher and a scientist. And like Olya mentioned, the grants, you know, like, people need funding. We want to know about these things and what's the best way to do it. I didn't have these skills prior to fieldwork, and now I feel more competent as a researcher and as a grant writer and as a scientist to do these things because I took the fieldwork classes.
Thank you, Ted. I appreciate that. It looks like we have somebody who has a question. Is it Simone? Yeah, I was wrong. Well, there are definitely a lot of experiences and lessons and skills that can be learned throughout this, you know, field work or internship. And I think what's important is that early on, getting students to understand that they may have been volunteering, and many of them have, because that's the nature of helping professionals. They have volunteered maybe their whole lives, but it's very different to do a fieldwork project. So I tell them it's almost like it's a volunteer type work. Most of my students are doing it for free. Only some of them get paid internships. But at the same time, it is like service learning, because what we're learning in class, we actually use a textbook that has themes like supervision. So we talk about how do you maximize supervision, diversity, working with diversity within the organization and beyond, you know, how to finish your internship, understanding your site within a context. So it is like service learning, because we send students to the field, but then they come back to class and we talk about it. And as a small community, the classes tend to be under 25 students. That's probably max that we've ever had. We talk about this and work through issues, generate ideas for projects. It's very supportive. I'm not surprised to hear from my students that they actually continue interacting after the class. They build relationships because it is a small community, and they're with each other for at least 4 courses throughout their undergraduate career, which is, I think, is fantastic. And then the third component, in addition to the service learning, is the internship. You are also getting something out of it. And there's so many lessons. So what Ted mentioned are specific skills maybe, and the confidence to do what you want to do, but there are other things as well. So for example, our students are allowed in the undergraduate concentration, are allowed to join a non-for-profit and or a research project. And sometimes there are things that are kind of in between. So you're doing research maybe for a non-for-profit. And that depends on what the students want to do in the future. So we try to tailor which organization they're partnering with based on what is more beneficial for them, building on their interests, gaining the skills. And so you are getting something out of it. And so another thing that I keep telling students that's so important is to try, even if you think you love the population, you need to try working with that population, because it doesn't always end up being what you want to do. Sometimes I encourage students who are not really into research for one reason or another to do a research project, because you are either going to love it or you're going to hate it. But in either case, you're learning as an undergraduate, and so it prepares you not to make the mistake of committing maybe to a PhD program or go into some area that you're not going to want to stick with. So this is a great way to do that. For graduate students, it's a little bit different. You know, this is a great way to build partnerships and make connections and network. If you're again working in an area of interest or getting the skills that you want. So for example, if, as Ted mentioned, if you're interested in grant writing, you're highly encouraged to join an organization that can provide you with those skills, can give you an option to do that. And I saw that Ted unmuted himself, so I'm gonna give him the floor.
No, thank you for sharing, Olya, and thank you, Jack, and everyone for being here with us. I also would like to, in the same spirit of what Olya was talking about, I know that DePaul now has a MS program specifically for community psych, and it's a combined program with an undergrad concentration that kind of moves people into the master's track. Maybe, Olya, you could tell us a little bit more about that, because I'm a little ignorant on the subject, but I know that's an important piece of this whole thing.
Yeah, I would love to. So for many years, we've been talking about that we have students who are interested in going to a PhD programs. We also have students who want to go straight into work. Many of them, again, being helping professionals, maybe we're working within the non-for-profit area or other areas. But then there were students who wanted to go to community psych or community psych related programs, but were not interested in a PhD program. They wanted to be more of what we call practitioners. And so for the longest time, having had the concentration and 2 graduate programs that are PhD, one community, one clinical community, we wanted to create a master's program. So instead of creating one, we created 2 programs, which are beginning this fall. We're super proud. I'm a little bit terrified being one of the co-directors. I'm trying to navigate all of this, but more excited. So we do have 2 programs. One is designed for those students who are in undergraduate concentration. Those students apply to the master's program, get accepted into the combined program, and in their senior year, they begin taking graduate courses. So they take 3 graduate courses while still undergrads, and then finish the program the year after. So it's a 4+1 type of program. And the other program is just a master's program. So anybody who has a BA or BS and is interested in community psychology practice is welcome to apply to the master's program. And that's a 2-year master's program. So, you know, if anyone is interested in learning more about it, or if you have potential students who might be interested in applying, do let me know, and I'll be more than happy to send you all the information. Thank you for bringing that up, Ted. Do we have any questions or comments? Why don't we open this up then to all of you? So we would love to hear from anyone. So of course, introduce yourself. We would love to know where, you know, what is your affiliation and what brought you to this table. And if you have any kind of question, or maybe you want to share an experience, we would love to hear that.
Should people raise their hands and then get called, or just unmute themselves and go?
That's a good question. Jean? I leave it to your guidance.
They can't unmute themselves, but I'm unmuting them all right now.
Thank you.
And then Jack, the other Jack, I needed to promote you to a panelist because I couldn't unmute you as an attendee.
And we have 10 minutes left.
Am I the other Jack?
You're the other Jack.
Hi, I'm the other Jack. Well, I guess I can sort of speak a little bit to Dr. Glantsman's class. I think it was Sci 356 for fieldwork in action. I really loved that class. Sort of like Dr. Glantsman was saying, it's very small. I've actually been out of DePaul. I'll be back in the fall. But I still, you know, she was talking about how it's small, it's a good classroom community. And I still have friends from, God, it must have been 4 years ago that I talked to pretty regularly from the program. So that's really cool. I've been asking them questions about where they ended up interning, how they liked it. It's a really great class. Also, like Dr. Glantsman said, that was the first time I created a CV, which was kind of intimidating, both because it was a lot at once, but I also felt pressure to like build the CV as quickly as I possibly could. But that comes with time, and Dr. Glantsman is very reassuring and helpful. You know, and I think it's a really great stepping stone. It's a really good way to prepare for fieldwork. Yeah, that's pretty much all I have for that class. It'll be interesting to see how
This one ends in 10
fieldwork
minutes.
in action class goes in the fall.
Where you going?
Different situations.
The short one.
This one, she said, what they said, she said.
Thank you, Jack. And I'm looking forward to having you in my class in the fall.
You're welcome. I'm looking forward to being in your class again.
Are there any questions from the panel? We have actually a question from Dr. Jason, and he's asking, where are the jobs for folks with a BA or BS in community psychology? That's a fantastic question. And I should remind you that there is an actual session coming up in about an hour on careers. So if you're interested in learning about different job outcomes for those who have a BA or BS or you know, master's or a PhD, I would encourage you to go to that session. But we are considering, so for students who are graduating from undergraduate concentration, and look at that, Ted is showing us the book that was put together by, actually Amber is one of the editors for that book, and Judah Viola as well, that helps students find or individuals in general find jobs in community psychology. And so our students have a multitude of options. We have had students who were interested in doctoral degrees, and so they of course apply to PhD programs. And as you know, there are different kinds of programs. There are programs that are specifically focused on different populations. There are obviously programs that are clinical in nature, so you're also gaining the skills to become a clinician, but with a community kind of focus. Master's students or BA, BS students can go into communities and work as evaluators. They can be community organizers. They can work within different government, you know, either for federal government, local government, or otherwise. Of course, research is a big part for both. So we do gain research-based skills in all of our programs, including an undergraduate community program. We do encourage our students to understand the importance of empirical grounding, right? So we need to have evidence to support our claims. And so it's important to be able to either create your own research or at least understand the research that's been done. And so we're training our students in the knowledge to be valuable members in leadership roles across a wide range of community-based organizations. You know, that can be healthcare, local social service, educational settings, among many others. So the idea is that if you are interested in community psychology related issues, the training that we provide, well, at DePaul, but other schools as well, can be available. And not just for those who are interested in strictly going to become community psychology trained, but others as well. So we have had in our concentrations, students who are going into public health, social work, law, among many, many other fields. I hope that answered it a little bit. And we have 5 minutes remaining. So does anyone else have either a comment, experience they want to share, or a question?
Dr. Glantsman, I do have a question. Do you know, like, is there any hard data that shows sort of where your students end up going after graduation? Do most of them end up going for community psychology PhDs or clinical community? Or, as you know, I'm interested in policy and that sort of thing, government. I know some kids have gone into education and that sort of thing. Do you know, like, what is the most popular lane your students go?
Excellent question. And we haven't looked at that lately. So that it is spread out across, like I said, even if students are going into graduate programs, there are not just necessarily community psychology programs. And then students who have gotten their degrees then move on and get different types of job. So what we're going to be doing actually this summer, and if you're interested, you're welcome to join our project. We're going to be contacting those students who have graduated from DePaul and asking them kind of what has been your experience in the concentration and where have you gone after. So there's so many different examples. So I'll give you one that was kind of to show you that community psychology is so unique and many times we kind of create our own path. I've had a student who was not interested in graduate school and she was interested in non-for-profits, but not the typical non-for-profit. She was interested in specifically behind the scenes, working more on like finances, sponsorship and things like that. she ended up doing her internship at Lurie's Children's Hospital, and she did such a fantastic job that she got hired by them, and they created a position for her. So one of the things that she was responsible in doing is vetting sponsors to make sure that they're not just coming in for a photo op, but really do care about the children and, you know, and what the services that the hospital is providing. So again, to show you how versatile careers can be. And many community psychologists, based on the book that Ted was showing, actually are saying that a lot of it is networking to find a job, and that many of them have created their own positions based on the skills rather than the title. Specifically, what do you envision for students who have an undergraduate concentration in community psychology? I want them to be good citizens, first and foremost, and I want them to apply ecological perspective in everything that they do. I want them to, you know, context is so important. I want them to think preventatively, so focus on prevention and not just kind of treatment or after the fact. All of those things that we talk about in our field, diversity, you know, respecting human diversity and all of that, you know, those are the things that I want, and I want them to be successful, of course. I don't know if that was the answer, but I tried to go quickly because we're out of time. I'm happy to talk to anybody. If you want to continue this conversation, I'm, as I tell my students, my virtual door is open. So feel free to shoot me an email. I'll put it in the chat. And if you have any questions about anything at all, I'm happy to, you know, work with you, share my materials, share the PowerPoint. And thank you everyone for being here, for finding the time. These are not easy times. So thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Olya.